All right, so now we're going to talk about the impact of the Great Depression and the response to the Great Depression. So the first thing that you need to know is that in 1928, we had an election, and obviously election is in November of 28, so he doesn't come into office until 1929, but our president at the beginning of the Great Depression is a man named Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover is a Republican who firmly believes in laissez-faire, which is the idea that government should leave businesses alone. He also believed in something that he called rugged individualism, which is the idea that it is best to give indirect help to people. So if people are in trouble or hurting, the way that the government can help best is to provide money or services to business, and then business can provide money or services to the people. He did not think that it was the government's responsibility to help the people directly. And so when the Great Depression begins, his response is not to provide shelters for the homeless or food kitchens or, well, soup kitchens or anything like that. His response is to do things like raise the tariffs so that foreign countries are paying more money in taxes and trying to raise revenue for the U.S. He also does things like provide tax breaks for businesses, so that way the businesses theoretically would have more money to hire people instead of paying their taxes. And unfortunately for Hoover, this doesn't help the Great Depression. And you see this huge amount of people who are unemployed. In fact, 25% of all Americans are unemployed. And as I mentioned in the last video, that number isn't spread evenly across all professions. There are far more farmers and factory workers who are unemployed than the wealthy. And while the wealthy are hit, like doctors and lawyers, they're not hit at that 25% unemployment rate the way that the factory workers or lower class economically people are. And so what you get are a lot of homeless camps because people can't afford to pay their mortgage, and so they lose their house. And they start calling them Hoovervilles. And so this is a homeless camp that people have taken over a park, and then they've built kind of houses or shacks, I guess would be a better word, out of scrap materials or wood or supplies that they found. And because people were so resentful of Herbert Hoover because they felt like he didn't do anything to help them, they started calling them Hoovervilles. And they're all across the country. Another thing that made him very unpopular was the Bonus Army. So the Bonus Army is a group of World War I veterans who were promised a bonus when they hit a certain age. And the fact of the matter is, when the Great Depression hit, a lot of these guys lost their jobs, and so they wanted their bonus early. They were supposed to get it in the 1940s, but they want it now because they don't need the money in 10 years, they need it now. So they marched to Washington and protest and have signs, like what you can see in that picture, and try to get their bonuses. And Hoover's response is to then unleash the military on them. And he basically arrests people, attacks people. Well, he doesn't personally. He has his personal militia arrest them, attack them, and it's all across the newspaper, and people see it and how he's treating these former World War I veterans, and it makes him extremely unpopular. Which brings us to the election of 1932. He is running against a Democrat named Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who has been in the government for several years. This is the election map of 1932. Any state that is blue went to FDR. Any state that is red went to Hoover. So you can see in 1932, people are ready for a change. They want more direct help. And so we get FDR. Now, FDR's idea is that money or services or help should directly come from government to people. He takes out that big business step because his idea was there's no guarantee that you can stop big business from being selfish or shallow or not giving enough. And so it's better for the government to directly oversee funding and programs and directly give it to the people. So he firmly believes in this. So there's no more of this rugged individualism where people just figure it out and work it out. It's the idea changes and it's the government should be there to help you. And he passes a lot of programs in something called the New Deal. FDR sees his first 100 days in office as the opportunity to get the most done. He knows he has a lot of popular support. He has the momentum going. He just won the election by a landslide. And so he tries to get as many of his programs passed in the first 100 days of office. And he calls it the New Deal because he feels like this is a new deal for Americans. They're getting a new perspective and a new outlook. And so he passes a lot of programs that you'll hear about in the next video to try to encourage people to get jobs and start working and fix the economy and end the Great Depression. And obviously it's not a quick fix or a simple fix. It does still take us, goodness, we don't get out until 1941. And so, well, really 42, because we get into World War I in December of 1941. So, World War II. So obviously it's not a quick fix by any means, but a lot of his programs that he passes in the New Deal are things that we are still looking at today. And what he did when he talked about the New Deal was he delivered something called fireside chats. And I'm actually going to have a separate video link to an example of a fireside chat. But what he did was he used the radio, and he would have sometimes once a week, sometimes more often, sometimes less often, but he would just have these radio, not even an interview because it was just him talking, but these radio chats where he would just talk. And most of the time he was just talking about New Deal programs and explaining them, but he did it in such simple language and such easygoing, laid-back language that people felt really comfortable with him and they really liked him, and as a result he ends up getting elected to be president 4 separate times. Now, he only serves for 3 of his terms because he passes away in the very beginning of his 4th term, but before FDR there was no law saying you could only run twice. They passed that after he passes away. But these fireside chats make him immensely popular. And after this video, go ahead and click on an example of one and just listen for a few minutes about what kind of things that he is talking about.